You wake bound in a darkness that breathes, its damp stone clinging to your skin like regret. The air tastes of scorched iron, as if someone burned faith until only blood and metal remained. A scream trembles through the walls, syncing with your heartbeat, reminding you that fear was the true inventor here. The voice in your mind tells you the Inquisition wasn't built on holiness, but on trembling hearts desperate to control what they feared. Silence tightens around you, heavy, expectant. Ahead waits the first chamber, proof that every cruelty begins with one step taken too confidently into darkness. You move through the darkness as if it is learning your footsteps, the air thinning with every breath. The scream behind you fades, but its echo reshapes itself into something larger, colder. Here, fear is no longer a sensation, it becomes structure. The hallway you enter stretches long and narrow, its walls lined with parchment that shivers in the draft like wounded skin. Decrees, accusations, confessions carved out of trembling throats. Each signature bleeds slightly at the edges, as if the pain of its writer still seeps through the fibers. The voice tells you the truth. The Inquisition did not begin with iron or rope or fire. It began with an idea, whispered first, preached next, then weaponized. Fear dressed itself in theology, draped itself in authority, and declared its own trembling to be divine law. What started as a doubt became doctrine. What began as suspicion became a system. Individual terror stretched itself into an institution that needed no monsters, because it created them. You run your fingers along the decrees, feeling the grooves left by quills guided by hands shaking from agony. This is how fear becomes law. Not with a single scream, but with thousands of quiet signatures made under duress, each one tightening the machinery of cruelty. You feel something shift in the air. Metal somewhere ahead catching the light, waiting. The hallway darkens, narrowing, guiding you toward the place where ideas became objects, where belief hardened into steel. The tools are close now, the physical shape of ideology itself. The corridor narrows until it seems to breathe with you, every step pulling you deeper into the ideology that shaped it. And then, before sound, before breath, you see it. A wooden frame stretched tighter than a bowstring, its ropes coiled like veins waiting for blood. The rack stands in the gloom like a question God never answered, a machine built to translate doctrine into pain. The air changes around it, thickening with an old, exhausted terror. This was where suspicion became a full-body experience, where the accused were not merely questioned, but unmade. The voice at your side whispers that the rack wasn't designed only to tear muscle from bone. Its true purpose was subtler, more devouring. It stretched identity the way the church stretched truth, pulling until something snapped, until the self thinned into whatever confession the inquisitors wanted to hear. You imagine the ropes tightening, inch by inch, each click of the wheel a small betrayal of the human form. Bodies lengthened beyond what they ever agreed to be, joints screaming, tendons fraying, souls cracking under the weight of forced certainty. This was the theology of suffering made mechanical, faith turned into torque. The wooden frame creaks as you approach, as if remembering every name it pulled from reluctant mouths. And the voice murmurs that this was only the beginning. Some inventions did more than tear flesh. They distorted reality, bent hours into eternities, and crushed the very notion of time itself. You leave the rack behind, its echo still tightening around your thoughts, and step into a chamber where the ceiling vanishes into darkness. Here, suffering is no longer stretched across wood. Here, it hangs in the air. At first, you notice only a single rope dangling like a vein severed from heaven. But then the pulley creaks above you, and the silence shifts, waiting for your weight. The voice tells you this device is deceptively simple. A rope, a knot, a drop. Yet it delivered a cruelty that felt bottomless. The strappado did not need teeth or blades. It needed only gravity, patient, merciless gravity, to turn your body into its own tormentor. You imagine your wrists bound behind your back, hoisted upward until your feet leave the ground, until the world falls away and your shoulders begin to tear like paper soaked in fear. The first snap is not audible, but you feel it, a jolt of white heat exploding through your ribs, a silence so sharp it cuts deeper than any scream. In this place, falling isn't movement. It's a verdict. You are suspended between earth and judgment, guilt forced to bloom inside you like a poisoned flower. The Inquisitors favored the strappado not because it killed, but because it unraveled. Every second of suspension whispered a new confession. Every drop, sudden or slow, turned doubt into obedience. It was a lesson carved into joints. Holiness could dislocate you. And as you sway in that imagined void, the voice warns that some devices did more than break limbs. They stole breath, blurred vision, and whispered madness into the spaces where reason once lived. Something ahead waits to do exactly that. The chamber ahead feels smaller, tighter, as if the air itself has grown suspicious of you. The echoes of torn joints fade into a quieter, more intimate terror, the kind that presses against your lips and waits. Here, suffering is not loud. It is suffocating. The walls seem to close in, each stone leaning forward like a witness unwilling to blink. The voice beside you tells you that after the strappado tore bodies apart, the Inquisition turned to the lungs, the fragile bellows of human truth. You smell it first: damp cloth, stagnant water, the bitter sting of old smoke clinging to the ceiling like trapped souls. They used these elements not to kill, but to confuse, to make drowning feel like obligation, to make breath itself betray you. Boxes so small you could not lift your head. Chambers filled with smoke until your eyes flooded and your throat clawed for escape. Water poured slowly over cloth until panic seeped into your bones like a second bloodstream. Each method a reminder that the body doesn't need blades to break. It needs only the promise that the next breath might not come. Your lungs tighten, imagining the wet fabric sealing over your face, the world shrinking to darkness and heartbeat. Here, oxygen becomes currency. Here, confession is the only breath you're allowed to keep. You begin to understand. Pain was only the first chapter. The true evolution of interrogation was perception, twisting reality until you no longer trusted your senses. And the voice warns you softly that ahead lie the inventions that do more than disorient. They deform, mutilate, and remake the human body into something unrecognizable. The grotesque is waiting. You step into a room where legends crumble like damp parchment. For years you've heard whispers of the Iron Maiden, its spiked shell, its theatrical cruelty. But the voice in the darkness leans close and tells you the truth. She never lived. No claws of metal. No hollow scream chamber. That fantasy was born later, when people needed a monster grand enough to justify their horror. But the Inquisition did not need spectacle. Its cruelty was quieter, more intimate, more deliberate. Before you stands not a maiden of spikes, but a coffin of thick, breathless wood. No metal teeth, no dramatic wounds, just darkness, pure, suffocating, erasing. You imagine being sealed inside, the lid pressed down until the last thread of light vanishes. In that tomb of silence, you are not tortured by blades but by time. Hours dissolve, days warp. Your own thoughts turn against you, circling like trapped insects. This was their true invention. Isolation so complete it scraped the soul raw. The voice tells you that humiliation was a sharper weapon than iron. Being hidden away, forgotten, condemned to an emptiness where your name rots before your body does. This was suffering refined into philosophy. No need for spikes when invisibility itself becomes the wound. You feel the air thicken, as if the coffin still remembers the weight of those who begged to be acknowledged, even in pain. And the voice whispers that the Inquisition's darkest creations were not grand machines, but small intrusions, tools designed to pierce, to enter, to corrupt the sanctity of the body from within. Those are waiting next. You move on, the echo of the coffin's silence still clinging to your skin, and the darkness shifts from enclosing the body to invading it. Here, cruelty becomes intimate, so close it feels like breath against your teeth. A table waits beneath a lone, swinging lantern. Upon it lie the tools that did not remain outside the flesh. They entered, they unfolded, they bloomed like metal flowers craving the warmth of human fear. The first glints faintly, the pair of anguish. At rest it looks harmless, small, delicate, almost ornamental. But the voice tells you to imagine it inside you. Petals forced open one turn at a time, blooming not with beauty but with violation. A slow expansion meant not to kill but to humiliate. From mouth, from flesh, from places meant to hold secrets, it transformed the body into a stage for enforced confession. Beside it lie tongs blackened by fire, their jaws warped from gripping what no one should ever touch. They were not weapons, they were declarations. That your body no longer belonged to you, that your dignity was negotiable, that suffering could be sculpted piece by trembling piece. And then the oral screws, twisted instruments designed to force silence open, to wrench truth from a mouth that dared to close. You can almost feel the turn of the crank, the cracking pressure climbing your jaw, the shame blooming faster than the pain. The voice murmurs that these devices were never meant to end life. Their purpose was deeper, crueler. They broke meaning, identity, selfhood. And soon you will see the tools that did not hide inside shadows or closed rooms. The ones crafted to display suffering, public, undeniable, and unforgettable. You step out of the narrow chamber and into a space that feels impossibly open, a void where your breath disperses before it reaches your lungs. The voice warns you that once pain invaded the body, it did not stay there. It spilled outward, seeking witnesses. And the Inquisition, hungry for obedience, turned suffering into theater. You find yourself standing in an imagined plaza, dawn bleeding faintly across the stones. Shadows gather like an audience long before the crowd arrives. Soon, whispers slither between them, soft, trembling, eager. The condemned are led into the center, their steps slow, their shame forced to bloom publicly. Eyes watch with a mixture of pity, fear, and relief that today, it is not them. Judgment hangs in the air like smoke, thick and accusatory. The voice beside you explains that this spectacle was no accident. Public pain was doctrine. Humiliation was pedagogy. Each execution, each display of agony, became a sermon carved not in words but in flesh. The Inquisition understood that fear multiplied when shared. That suffering witnessed became suffering internalized. Entire communities disciplined by the sight of one breaking body. The machines appear next, rising from the haze like monuments. Wooden frames taller than men, wheels designed not for transport but for twisting limbs, cages suspended high so that every gasp could be seen. These were not devices meant only for the accused. They were messages. Proof that authority could reach deeper than conscience, stronger than mercy. You feel the weight of 1,000 eyes on your back, and the voice whispers that the next tools were built not just to punish bodies, but to reshape behavior, turning entire cities into extensions of the Inquisition's will. What comes next is discipline forged into metal. You feel the plaza tighten around you, the murmurs thinning into a hush so heavy it seems to settle on your shoulders. The voice tells you that every theater needs an ending, and the Inquisition crafted one with chilling precision. From the fog of watching eyes emerges a wooden post, simple, unadorned, yet crowned with a cold iron collar. The garrote, an instrument not of spectacle's frenzy, but of controlled endings. A slow, mechanical goodbye. You imagine stepping toward it, the air thinning as though your lungs already know what waits. The collar touches your throat, icy, indifferent, its metal kiss carrying the faint memory of countless final breaths. Behind you, the crowd leans forward, suspended between dread and duty. Above you, the executioner's will waits for a single turn to decide the speed of your departure. The voice whispers that the garrote was considered mercy, a cleaner death than fire or tearing. But mercy, in the hands of power, becomes something warped, a kindness sharpened into cruelty. The pressure begins softly at first, like fingers testing your pulse. Then it tightens, a slow squeeze, a deliberate erasure. Each twist collapses another fragment of breath, another piece of identity slipping into darkness. Here, death becomes a negotiation. How long you gasp, how long the crowd watches, how long power decides you deserve to struggle. Your final breath isn't yours. It belongs to the system that orchestrated it. As vision blurs and sound drains into a distant ringing, the voice murmurs that tools like these extract more than air. They demand obedience even from the dying. And now, it is time to follow the cost of that obedience. the ideological price of allowing fear to rule the living. The last breath still trembles in the air as you step away from the garrote's shadow, and the world around you dims, not from pain, but from revelation. The voice beside you softens, almost sorrowful. It tells you that metal was never the final instrument. Flesh breaks, bones snap, but it is the soul that corrodes longest. And the true victims of the Inquisition were not only those bound to the devices, but those who operated them. You walk through a corridor lined not with chains, but with robes white, red, black, hanging like the empty skins of men who once believed themselves righteous. Priests who turned scripture into shackles. Judges who learned to doubt compassion. Executioners who felt their hands grow colder with each twist of the wheel. Fear shaped the devices, but the devices shaped their wielders, hollowing them inch by inch. Not through screams, but through silence. Through routine. Through the quiet normalization of suffering. The voice reminds you of your first steps in this nightmare. The darkness pressing against your body, the smell of iron, the sense of falling. Those terrors were not accidental. They were reflections, echoes of what lived inside the men who called themselves instruments of God. Every act of torture carved away something essential within them, leaving rooms like this behind. Rooms filled with robes that once carried conviction and now carry only dust. You feel it, that spiritual rot seeping through the walls, a reminder that institutions collapse not when confronted by enemies, but when hollowed by the cruelty they justify. And the voice murmurs that the unraveling has already begun. The great machinery of faith and fear is creaking, splintering, preparing to collapse under the weight of its own corruption. You move deeper into the dim corridor, and for the first time the darkness feels unsteady, quivering, as though the walls themselves are unsure of what they once defended. The voice at your side whispers that after the soul corrodes, the structure follows. No empire of fear remains solid forever. Even stone breaks when doubt seeps into its cracks. At first, the fractures were whispers. Soft rumors traded behind cathedral doors. Murmurs of bribes slipped beneath tables. Secrets bartered in the same shadows where prayers were once spoken. Priests questioned verdicts they had signed. Judges hesitated to condemn. Executioners paused before tightening the collar, their hands trembling with the memory of screams they could no longer rationalize. What had been certainty became hesitation. What had been devotion became discomfort. The machine began to feel its own weight. You hear it now, a faint groaning, like wood under strain, like rope beginning to fray. The entire institution stretching, pulling apart, just as the rack once pulled at unwilling limbs. But now, the tension works in reverse. The system tearing itself, ideology against politics, fear against pride, faith against the rot it tried to hide. The voice tells you that cruelty, no matter how carefully engineered, always becomes unsustainable. It festers, it spreads, and eventually it devours the hands that wield it. Bits of plaster crumble from the ceiling as you walk. The air tastes of collapse. Dust, disillusionment, old authority losing its balance. You feel the ground tremble beneath you, not from torture, but from truth finally pushing upward. The voice leans close, almost breathless, and murmurs that all nightmares reach a point where they can no longer contain themselves. The Inquisition is nearing that point. Ahead waits the reckoning, inevitable, heavy, and long overdue. You step into a silence so complete it feels wrong, like a wound where sound once lived. The voice walks with you, low and steady, telling you that every machine of cruelty has a final breath. And here, in this hollow corridor, you feel the Inquisition's exhale, long, exhausted, dying. The walls sag inward, stones split by time, as if even the architecture has decided it can no longer bear witness. Chains hang from the ceiling, rusted through, their links flaking into reddish dust that drifts lazily to the floor. Torture tables tilt to one side like broken altars. Ropes are frayed, wheels stuck in positions that once demanded obedience but now only creak softly in the stillness. You walk past chambers that once pulsed with screams, now filled only with the weight of what happened there. Abandoned instruments stare back at you like relics from a forgotten religion. one built on trembling faith and sharpened fear. Outside, the plazas are empty. No crowds, no judges, no smoke curling toward the sky, just wind tracing the outlines of where bodies once knelt. The echoes linger, though. Faint murmurs, phantom breaths, the ghostly imprint of humiliation carved into the stones. Institutions die, the voice reminds you, but their suffering does not. It lingers in memory, in culture, in the silent way a community walks past the places it once feared to look at. You feel the ruins tremble with absence, as though waiting for someone to acknowledge them. The voice tells you this is the legacy of cruelty. It outlives its creators, lingering like a shadow even when the sun has moved on. Ahead, the ruins thin into a quieter space, one made not of stone or chains, but of reflection. A place where history stops shouting and begins whispering its final truths. The ghosts are waiting. You move through the ruins with slower steps now, as if the ground itself has grown sacred. The voice tells you to listen, not for screams, but for what remains after centuries of silence. And in that quiet, you begin to feel them. The ghosts' history refuses to bury. They gather in the corners where light does not reach, in the cold drafts drifting through cracked stones, in the hollow places where names should have been remembered but were not. These are not spirits seeking vengeance. They are memories, fragments of breath, scraps of identity, echoes of confessions forced into existence. You sense them as a chill against your ribs, a weight at your back, a tremor in the air each time you inhale. The trauma carved here did not vanish when the doors closed. It seeped into culture, into stories, into the timid way people learn to question authority only in whispers. Fear leaves fossils. The voice murmurs, even when the bones are gone. You walk past where a cell once stood, the outline faint but lingering like a bruise beneath the centuries. No name is etched in the stone. Most were never written down at all, erased by design, forgotten by convenience. Yet their presence hangs here, heavy and patient. You feel their unanswered prayers, their final thoughts suspended like dust motes in stale air. The voice tells you that history is not made of dates and decrees. It is made of wounds. And some wounds echo far beyond the bodies that bore them. These ghosts do not haunt because they linger. They haunt because we remember. And as you approach the final chamber of this descent, the voice whispers that the true lesson of suffering is not in the past, but in what we choose to do with its shadow now. You leave the shadows of unmarked graves behind, but the cold they planted follows you, settling into your chest like a quiet revelation. The voice beside you whispers that ghosts do not cling to the past. They cling to us. And as you step into a pale, uncertain light, you begin to see why. Cruelty leaves descendants, not just victims. Its legacy threads itself through generations, hiding in the ways we look at strangers, in the judgments we pass without thinking, in the righteousness we wear like armor to mask our own trembling. You walk through a corridor that slowly loses its stone, its chains, its medieval weight. Walls soften into plaster. Torchlight becomes electric hum. The centuries fold into one another until the chamber dissolves into something unsettlingly familiar. The world you live in. Modern, bright, yet carrying the same shadows beneath its skin. Suspicion dressed as moral duty. Outrage sharpened into identity. Fear masquerading as certainty. The voice tells you that though the Inquisition's tools have rusted, its patterns have not. We still police each other with whispers. We still crush what we fear. We still mistake cruelty for clarity. You catch your reflection in a pane of darkened glass. Faint, blurred, but undeniably yours. And suddenly the journey shifts inward. The chains were never merely physical. They lived in the instinct to condemn, to assume, to punish without understanding. The ghosts you met were not only the dead. They were reminders of how easily any society can inherit the posture of authority without noticing the weight it places on another's throat. The voice softens, telling you that this is where cruelty endures. Not in devices or decrees, but in the quiet habits we never question. And as you move toward the final chamber, the world narrows into introspection, preparing to ask what you will do with the legacy pressed into your hands. You stand before a passage that feels different from every corridor you've walked, quieter, heavier, as though the air itself hesitates to breathe. The voice beside you slows, its tone no longer guiding you through ruins, but through something far more intimate. It tells you that this final door is not made of wood or iron. It has no hinges, no lock, no history etched into its frame. This door lives inside you. The light dims, the world narrows, and every step you take feels like descending back into the first darkness you woke in. The smell of iron, the echo of screams, the silence that pressed against your ribs. All of it returns, but softened now, reshaped into understanding. The journey was never only about racks or ropes or flames. It was about the hands that turned the wheels, the minds that justified the pain, the hearts that stopped questioning. You reach the door, faint and formless, more like a boundary than an object. The voice whispers that cruelty is not historical. It is human. It is the shadow cast by fear, by righteousness, by the hunger to be right even when compassion is begging to speak. And so the last question is not about them, it is about you. What part of you is capable of becoming the interrogator? The one who tightens the rope, not with malice, but with certainty? The one who condemns, because silence feels easier than doubt? The one who inherits the tools without realizing they are in your hands? The centuries collapse into a single truth. Every era builds its own devices. They may not stretch limbs or crush breath, but they wound all the same through words, through judgment, through the quiet cruelty of unchecked belief. The voice leans close, almost touching your ear, and tells you that the only way to end the Inquisition is to see where it lives in you. The door waits. It will not open itself. The whisper fades into the dark, intimate, haunting, unforgettable.